Hello and welcome to my channel, I Win to Lose Gaming. In this RERUN DPS Showdown, we will be comparing the current reruns of Tartaglia and Hu Tao to the inevitable future rerun of the GOAT, Ganyu. While we're all playing RERUN Impact, what better opportunity than this to revisit some of our favorite DPS characters in a head-to-head DPS Showdown. But before we introduce our contestants, it's time to pay some bills, and today's sponsor is Manscaped.com. Does your landscaping look like this? Well, it's time to make it look like this instead, with perfectly round snow globes and the cleanest cuts possible. You need to deal with all that unwanted shrubbery with the right tools for the job, and that's where Manscaped comes in. The Perfect Package 4.0 comes with a brand new and improved Lawnmower 4.0. This ridiculously handsome annihilator of bushes is waterproof and comes with advanced skin-safe technology, which minimizes the risk of nicks and cuts for those precious meat clackers. The Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer also has this slick-looking wireless charging dock with sparkly LED lights to show you how much juice you have. Also included in the Perfect Package 4.0 kit are two things that until now I did not know I needed: the Crop Preserver deodorant and the Crop Reviver toner spray. So if you ever need to glaze those chicken tenders, simply spritz on Manscaped's proprietary liquid formulas in order to be extra delicious. But that's not all. For a limited time only, you get all this plus 2 free gifts: the Shed travel bag and the Manscaped anti-chafing boxer briefs. Go to manscaped.com today and get 20% off plus free international shipping plus 2 free gifts when you use the promo code IWINTOLOSE at checkout. Manscaped, the perfect tools for your family jewels. So fun fact about my channel, I have yet to do a DPS Showdown with everyone's favorite Tartaglia, Childe. My Childe will be running multiple different builds throughout. Thanks to the Polar Star, we now have a new best in slot weapon for Childe's melee attack damage. This weapon drastically improves his melee damage output. We'll also be running a nuke build with him as well. Nuke build, you say? That's right. Not only is Teyvat a nuclear wasteland with all the nukes from the player base, this wouldn't be fun or fair if we didn't include one of the best parts of Childe's kit, his enormously moist nukes. Next, let's talk about everyone's favorite whimsical prankster, Hu Tao. Hu Tao is 100% confirmed to be the next banner after Tartagliarglorp's banner. She has one of the highest single target DPS outputs in the game. Now, if this video was only a DPS showdown of single target boss fights, then this wouldn't be interesting even in the slightest. So we'll be throwing Hu Tao into scenarios that might make her a little less comfortable. More than one enemy. Hu Tao will also be running many different builds, ranging from Constellation 5 builds for multiple phases to Constellation 6 builds for nuking and single-phased fights. The final contestant is the GOAT, Ganyu. Ganyu is not yet confirmed for her rerun yet, but if I had to guess, she'll probably be back someday in the future, hopefully. Please miHoYo, bring back the GOAT. With that being said, seeing a comparison of the current rerun characters and the inevitable but unconfirmed Ganyu rerun may provide you with an idea of how these three DPS characters compare to each other. To keep this video fresh and interesting, we'll be taking these three contestants into new, uncharted territories for an I Win to Lose DPS Showdown. There will be the usual boss fights, partial team comparisons, a nuclear warfare showdown, and even a comparison of if they didn't have their Constellation 6s. But before that, let's quickly go over the methodology. Zhongli will be used in situations where he allows the contestants to focus purely on damage. Resonances and food will be used to balance stats in certain situations to normalize damage potentials. And now for everyone's favorite part of the video, the disclaimers. Most of these times are done at my level of investment into these characters and at my level of problem solving and skill. This means that barring a couple exceptions, all these characters are Constellation 6 with Refinement 5 weapons, and their talents are all very well leveled. I spent between 30 minutes to an hour on each character so as not to grind infinitely just to save 1 or 2 seconds. Keep in mind that all the times in this video can be improved upon, and this is simply one point of reference. There are most certainly oversights, execution errors, and more. Just because character A performs better than character B in this specific scenario does not mean character A is better than character B. Please take everything with a giant grain of salt. So if you're feeling hot today, get ready to chill as we dive into this DPS showdown. As always, let's start with our favorite volunteers, the Regisvines. Ah yes, our poor plant friends that die to a light breeze. Even though this showcase is rather outdated at this point, we must maintain this tradition of eating our salad first before the main course. The Regisfine was of course no match for Childe's upgraded melee attacks, thanks to the brand new Polar Star bow, and Childe washed away his vegetables in a meager 4.44 seconds. Hu Tao is next, and people aren't the only thing that she sends off to the afterlife, but also included in her clientele are giant sentient frozen salads. Thanks to her raw 52,000 damage charge attacks, Hu Tao has no need to waste time swinging her poor little ghost around. Now since the last time I used Ganyu in one of these videos, I've had a bit more time to practice her Constellation 6 charge shot spam. Ganyu was really excited to eat her vegetables as usual, so she butchered our poor plant friend the fastest, but just by a smidge. But as always, our poor plant friends can't survive the slightest amount of damage. Fortunately, our friendly rock frog volunteer, the Primo Geovishap, is a far more robust target. Let's see how the RERUN crew does against it. Well, I think it's to no one's surprise that Childe performed the worst here. Childe isn't exactly known for his single target damage. Nonetheless, all things considered, I think our 6th most favorite Childe in this game, after Diona, Chi-Chi, Klee, Sayu, and Timmy, did admirably well here. Pokemon was onto something, making water strong against rock. Now this is Hu Tao's moment to shine, as she's put up against a single phase beefy target like the Primo Geovishap. Breaking news, Hu Tao murdered an innocent giant rock frog in a single E infusion window, giving her the clear W in this murdering an innocent giant rock frog competition. And last but not least, we have Ganyu. For some reason, I just keep improving Ganyu's time against our favorite giant rock frog in every DPS Showdown with her, despite not having upgraded a single artifact for her. Well, slow and steady does the trick, but actually not that slow because her charge shots dispatched the Primo Geovishap very efficiently. Up next, we have the Demon Puppet Swordsman, the Magu Kenki. I enjoy including the Magu Kenki because it is a 2-phase boss fight. Luckily for Childe, his Constellation 6 is for once actually useful here, allowing us to swap to Zhongli to reapply his beefy shield. However, that's where the rainbows and sunshine ends for our favorite Tartaglia, because he was just shy of taking out the Magu Kenki's 2nd phase prior to it teleporting away. Sadly for Hu Tao, given the 2-phase nature of this fight, Hu Tao, if you only use her to do damage, cannot rely on a Constellation 6 build, so that's where a Constellation 5 build comes in. By using her E very early, this allows Hu Tao's E cooldown to be back up shortly after Magu Kenki is vulnerable again. Then Hu Tao just does what Hu Tao does pretty well and charge attack spams it into the afterlife. As for the not yet confirmed but inevitable RERUN, Ganyu, her time here was neck to neck with Hu Tao's time, thanks to having some free time in between phases for her to set up her burst, and thanks to Hu Tao having her natural downtime as well as a Constellation 5 build, Ganyu was able to close the gap in this single target DPS situation. But not all is lost for our suspiciously shaped, plug-dropping man Tartaglia. The next scenario will feature the old Abyss 1231 against these 2 ruined guards. I decided to revisit this with Childe because of the brand new bow, the Polar Star, which dramatically improves his Riptide damage. Impressively enough, Childe's raw Hydro damage is competitive to Hu Tao's poor AoE damage and Ganyu's great AoE damage. Now if there were hypothetically 3 targets for Childe's Riptide to slash against each other, I can see Childe even surpassing the other 2. I also revisited this with Hu Tao after upgrading a couple pieces on my Shimenawas. Hu Tao barely managed to complete this faster than the other 2 with a Constellation 6 build. This is still impressive though, given Hu Tao's single target charge attack damage nature. And last but not least, Ganyu is also competitive to the other 2, and frankly with more runs and minor optimizations, any of these characters could have come out on top here. For all intents and purposes, I would say that this is basically a tie. Remember how we beat up our favorite rock frog with just one character? Well, let's end its misery even faster by adding one teammate to each of these characters. Thanks to the initial nuke plus reverse vape, Childe disposed of the Primo Geovishap in almost a third of the time it took him solo. Childe really is an amazing enabler for Xiangling. Interestingly enough, instead of enabling Xiangling, Ganyu is enabled by Xiangling, and she's able to effortlessly melt all her charge shot damage, which is a lot of damage. In this case, Xiangling's damage is fairly minor, but with over 90k blooms from Ganyu, who needs Xiangling to do damage? And last but not least, well, Hu Tao's single target damage skyrocketed even further with Xingqiu. Hu Tao's damage was so overwhelming that I decided it didn't even matter that the Primo Geovishap was infused with Hydro, thus allowing it to resist Xingqiu's damage. There's one last example for this scenario of +1 teammate I'd like to show you all, and that is the actual best damage enhancer for Hu Tao, at least for 5 seconds, and that is Constellation 2 Ayaka. Constellation 2 Ayaka allows Hu Tao to melt her charge attacks and her burst, which is absolutely insane. It took Hu Tao and Ayaka just 1 second to wipe out our poor rock frog after it became vulnerable. But wait, that's not all. We'll be torturing our favorite rock frog volunteer one last time in this video by pitting quote-unquote Constellation 5 versions of these characters against it. Well, Childe's run didn't change in the slightest because his constellations barely benefit him during this fight. Let's instead move on to Hu Tao, who sadly loses a ton of damage without her Constellation 6 build. By losing this amount of damage, Hu Tao is unable to one-cycle the Primo Geovishap anymore, and thus has to wait until she can use her E again to take it out. Ganyu also loses a lot of damage without her Constellation 6, but the damage she loses is mostly front-loaded damage for just a couple of seconds. Essentially, for this fight, Ganyu lost 2 fully charged charge shots. However, unlike Hu Tao, Ganyu doesn't have to worry about any downtime, so she can just keep chucking her comically broken charge shots at her poor innocent giant rock frog. But what fun would this video be with 2 of the best nukers in the game without a nuke showcase? Let's start off with the OG OP nuker in Genshin Impact, Tartaglia. By using a Refinement 5 Thundering Pulse to nuke, Tartaglia managed to do 1,361,557 damage. That's quite impressive. But now it's time for Death herself. Now you'd think that being slapped with the ghost wouldn't hurt at all because, after all, it's a ghost. However, Hu Tao will have you believing otherwise. After a colossal 1,810,668 damage ghost slap. Spooky. Ganyu is next, and she isn't really known for single, huge burst numbers. Sadly, our robot friend is potentially too frail to survive both the main arrow and the bloom, so I shot the ground next to it so only the bloom would connect. 578,774 damage. This may seem pathetic compared to the other 2, but considering Ganyu can melt 3 charge shots in quick succession, I shudder to think how much damage she could have done if her volunteer had more health. And what kind of DPS showdown would this be without a nice leisurely stroll through Abyss 12? Because this Abyss is so spanking brand new, Aliss and I decided that we would tackle this one chamber at a time. And the only restriction is that the same team must be used across all 3 chambers. We're going to start off with Childe vs Ganyu, because they actually use the exact same supports, Bennett, Kazuha, and Xiangling. Don't worry, we'll get to Hu Tao later, but let's see how they do. Starting off with 12-1-1, Childe lost a lot of time here thanks to taking longer than 15 seconds to complete this with Kazuha. Because of this, the Pyro Shield is applied to the Fatui agents and they become much beefier. However, 16 seconds is still a great time, especially with Kazuha instead of Venti. Aliss, on the other hand, is known as one of the best Ganyu players in the world, for a reason. Without even using Kazuha against the first 3 samurai, Aliss just guns them down mercilessly and thus bypasses Xiangling needing to do anything. This allows him to complete 12-1-1 in under 15 seconds, and thus bypassing the Pyro Shield mechanic. Next we have the 1.3 million hit point Magu Kenki. So I've improved a lot as a Childe player, cutting down on my previous Childe run from 29 seconds to 24 seconds. However, one weakness for Childe is that he is only able to vape his burst and perhaps an E infusion generally. Once these 2 sources of vape are gone, he has to instead rely on Xiangling's reverse vape to finish the job. And even though Pyronado was doing over 120,000 damage a tick, and freaking Guoba was doing over 114,000 damage, this still required multiple rounds of attacks from Xiangling to finish off the second form of Magu Kenki. Remember when I said earlier during the nuke showcase, I wonder how much Ganyu could have done if her volunteer had more health? Well, now we kind of know. With the artistic nature of applying the elements to our puppet friend, Aliss's extremely creative rotation here melted so much of Ganyu's damage, and every single hit crit. Ganyu's flexibility for splitting up her melt damage gave her the edge over Childe's singular massive Hydro nuke. And lastly we have 12-3-1. With the super RNG reliant burrowing snakes, these runs were so close that I would effectively call them a tie. Or maybe that's just me trying to make myself feel better after seeing Aliss's ridiculously well executed runs. Anyway, this is a great example of where Childe's Riptides actually did a ton of work. Then with a quick swipe right, Childe one-shotted the second wave. As always, watching Aliss use Ganyu is like watching Gordon Ramsay cooking something. You feel tense and awestruck at the same time. With practically all of his Ganyu's attacks critting and melting, his Ganyu completed this with pristine efficiency, and I'm sure you guys can tell why I often ask him to represent Ganyu. Whew. Okay, so next let's talk about the results of those 2 Abyss runs and also why Hu Tao wasn't put side by side to the other 2. For quite some time now in speedrunning, Hu Tao isn't often used as the main on-field charge attack DPS that you might expect her to be. Also, the first chamber of Abyss has always been one of Hu Tao's biggest weaknesses, given that she starts at full HP, and on top of that, the current Abyss 12-1-1 also has Fatui agents, which heavily resist pyro damage. On top of that, Hu Tao is forced to run a Constellation 5 build because of the multiple waves in all 3 chambers. But do not fret, my Hu Tao fans, because I did not neglect her here, and instead, I used Hu Tao for what she does best in speedrunning, and that is nuking. This 12-3-1 run is the current world record as of writing this script, and relegates Ganyu to a support role for applying cryo and the elegy buff. After Eula wipes out the first wave, Hu Tao instantly one-shots the second wave. While this Abyss's top half environment is terrible for a little prankster to be the main DPS, she will continue to break world record times with her cryo-shattering nuking capabilities. And while Ganyu and Hu Tao were integral parts to the 12-3-1 world record time, Childe holds the current record time in 12-1-1. Childe has one of the fastest 200,000 or so damage nukes in the game, which is perfect for wiping out the first 3 Stooges in 12-1-1. Okay, that was a lot of stuff, and here is a chart summarizing the results. Thanks to the Polar Star bow, Childe's melee damage in single target scenarios is much more competitive than it used to be. Had this DPS Showdown been done prior to the release of the Polar Star, these results would look much worse for him. It really goes to show that the meta can change by simply releasing a new weapon. Childe's times were also barely improved by his constellations in comparison to the other two, with only the fight against the Makukenki effectively utilizing Childe's Constellation 6. As for Hu Tao, well, she definitely struggled as the solo main DPS in the current top half of Abyss 12, but that didn't stop her from annihilating all the world bosses, and even remaining competitive against the 2 Ruin Guards. Nonetheless, Hu Tao is still an insane single target monster, and even factoring in her downtime with a Constellation 5 build, she was still competitive to the other 2 characters. And to this day, Hu Tao is still shattering world record speedrun times with her ridiculously powerful nuke. The last thing I wanted to point out is that from a meta and team composition perspective, Ganyu and Childe both utilize the same set of supports, Bennett, Kazuha, and Xiangling. However, while Childe is reverse vaping Xiangling's damage, Ganyu is reverse melting her own damage. As seen in the earlier Abyss 12 performance, both these characters did fairly well and were honestly very close to each other. However, Ganyu can also be used in a freeze composition, whereas Childe is relegated to nuking outside of his usual natural team composition. All in all 3 of these characters are meta-defining, and have been breaking records ever since their releases. You should rest easy knowing that they are all monsters in their own right. And if you've made it this far into the video, thank you. Please do check out the sponsor for today's video, Manscaped, as they make these types of videos possible. Also, I regularly make Genshin Impact videos ranging from Caesar showcases, DPS showdowns, guide videos, and more. So be sure to smash the subscribe button, as it's the best and easiest way for you to support my work. Also, don't forget to like the video and leave a comment for the YouTube algorithm. As always, I appreciate every single one of you. This is I Win to Lose, signing out.